Hello and welcome to the Interior Design Business. My name is Jeff Hayward and I'm here with my co-presenter Susie Rumbold, past president of the British Institute of Interior Design and creative director at Suter Interiors, to discuss the subtle art of storytelling in interior design.
If a picture paints 1,000 words, then surely an interior can tell 1,000 stories. Our most beloved interior spaces are grounded in a time and place and speak eloquently of the lives of the people who have inhabited them, either now or in the past. But what is the magic essence that makes these much-loved spaces so special? And how can interior designers recreate this magic in their work? Welcome to the Interior Design Business.
Today we're joined by two very special guests, consummate storytellers in their own right. We have Nathan Hutchins and Inge Moore from Muza Lab. Welcome to the show.
Before we begin, can you each give us a brief introduction to yourselves and to the Muza Lab business? Nathan, can we start with you?
Sure. Good morning, I'm Nathan Hutchins and I'm one of the co-founders together with Inga of Muza Lab. It's a company that we started in 2016 and we wanted to really branch out and do our own thing for a bit, really focus on design, focus on building relationships with our clients and sort of finding our own place in the design industry.
Fantastic. And Inga?
Hi, I'm Inga. We came up with the name Muza Lab because we wanted it to be inspiration laboratory. Muza from the word muse and lab because we think there's science to design as well.
Yes, I agree.
And your background in design, can you just tell me a little bit about where you came from in terms of your design heritage?
So my father was a contractor who specialized in historic restoration of Danish West Indian architecture. So I spent my sort of youth and my teenage years on construction sites around old buildings that, you know, had their own sort of very specific architectural style. And I loved being around construction, I loved being around buildings, but I wanted to be the person creating the buildings rather than building them.
Ever since I was little, I built houses for my dolls. Every niche I could find, I'd make little pieces of furniture. So every doll had a full-on house. So I've always been building things. I love making things with my hands. But when I went to uni, I decided, no, I can't do design. I started off doing computer science, but then quickly segued back to design.
You did computer? I never knew
Yes.
Amazing.
That's
Did you not know that?
No, I didn't. That's actually shocking on a number of levels for me.
It's about the code, and you know, design is like code. So you have to kind of put all the pieces together to make the design.
Well, we always say it's a process. I know we're going slightly off topic here, but it is definitely a process. And I came up with something recently, which was, you know, the way if you have the sonnet is the most restrictive and formal form of poetry in the English language, where different lines have the certain number of syllables and the couplets have to rhyme in a particular way. But within the structure of a sonnet, it is possible to say anything. And I always think interior design is a bit like that it is a rigid process, but within the confines of that process, it is possible to say anything.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, that there's so many stories and so many ways to interpret it.
So what do we mean by storytelling?
It's about taking people on a journey, giving spaces meaning. And, you know, for us, interior design is about how we connect with people and how people connect with a space. And those little elements of design that sort of give that enduring meaning to a space is what storytelling is to me.
I think it's also how space makes you feel, because it's all about feelings. You know, you can walk into any beautiful room, but you don't remember it unless you feel something in that room. And that's really what creates the memories, and the story kind of sets the scene for that.
Can any art form be used to tell a story?
Of course. I think, you know, every art form is telling a story, whether it's a song that carries a lot of emotion and takes you on a little sort of journey, and, you know, you kind of get lost in a song, you start thinking, oh, is this from a movie and what's happening? And a painting or a ballet, everything. It's all about, again, it's that sort of emotional connection. It's just that thing, what's going to capture it in your imagination and make it memorable.
And if other art forms have a toolkit they use to communicate, such as rhythm, pitch, volume, instrumentation, what tools do you think are available to the interior designer?
Textures, materials, colors, finishes. all of those things woven together then tell a story.
I mean, it's about creating a space that becomes a place, you know, and it's what's the mood, what's the experience of arriving into it, you know, are you coming through a compressed space into a big open space? What is the lighting like? What is just the whole atmosphere of a space? It does kind of guide you, and you think about the way that people lead you through buildings. You do have different volumes of spaces, and you have intimate places and grand spaces, and that kind of is part of the journey.
And the beauty is that every building kind of gives you the cues of, you know, this is my story. You know, it doesn't always have to be a big view. It could be like a really tight view in certain spaces. And that's why, you know, before we start on the journey of this, we're kind of really trying to understand the building, trying to understand the culture of the place, you know, do a lot of research, find the stories and then weave them into our own.
But if a building in theory is just a series of boxes or shapes contained, what I'm really thinking is it the FF&E predominantly that you then use to draw out the story in that space?
No, not at all. It's everything. It's the space planning. It's not just a box. You know, for example, on the beach in Athens, we're working on a project that had a building that was existing, and, you know, the architects were like, okay, you come in and here's the reception. Well, no. For me, if I'm going to the beach in Athens, I want to arrive at the beach. So we replanned the whole building. We moved the reception arrival experience to a window overlooking the beach, and that's where you want to arrive. That's how you want to start your experience of this place. So for us, it's the whole thing. It's the
really
space planning, it's the moving between indoors and out.
Yeah. And I suppose in that situation that you were just talking about, you were just describing a situation where, in a way, that the beach is the story, and then you're looking at how you can enhance that and really magnify that within the design.
Yes.
And as interior designers, we can shape, we don't just have to accept the square box. You can shape the building with space planning. You can create like a curved wall on one side, which kind of leads the journey in a certain way. In this instance, we created a bit of a ramp. So you kind of went up this ramp and then had this magnificent big view in front of you. So it's not just decorating the box, but kind of exploring how we can get to the end story.
Thinking outside of the box. Sorry, I had to say it.
And do you think about the stories that you're telling in terms of a beginning, middle, or end, or if they're like journeys, a departure point and an arrival point? I mean, how does that affect your design thinking?
I don't think there's a beginning, middle part, or an end. For me, it's kind of a concept, a story, a kind of
frame,
idea,
yeah.
an idea, and you can loosely interpret it. And that's the beauty of it. It's not like a strict discipline of.
I think there's lots of short chapters.
Yeah.
What are the elements that make up the story of a place?
The site, I think, is always kind of where we start. You know, what's unique about the site? Sometimes it's geographical, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's historical. So, you know, we were just having an off-side conversation about where I came from, and there was many colonial pieces of history to it, and it developed a unique type of architecture that came from Europe, but then was sort of adapted to fit tropical
The climate, yeah.
locations. And it was through the introduction of deep arcades on the ground floors, big overhangs with what we call gingerbread, which is the little patterns on the edge of the house. You know, and that's a interpretation of history and the site. And I think even in our modern projects, it's the same thing. The site is the starting point, and then history, culture, but also the use.
Yeah, the
you know.
people that use it, and what do they want to use it? How do you want to feel when you use it? What do you want to do there? The light, you know, is it a bright light place? Is it a dark place? And all those things give you a different end result.
And if you're working on a site, do you then look to the wider community and the wider setting? I'm thinking about, because I know you use some really interesting art and fabulous textures, and you bring in things like craft pieces and things. I mean, what are the other elements that you look for that perhaps surround that site that you would then incorporate into your projects?
I think we're particularly keen on craft and kind of handmade things. You know, it's tactile, things that you touch and feel kind of really make an interior special, I think. It's not just smooth plaster, or it could be just smooth plaster, but it's kind of the tactile.
The tactileness, but it's also materiality. So when we did the Alpina in Gstaad, and you know, it was the first hotel built up there in 100 years, and the client's brief to us was that he wanted it really cozy. And for us, you're not going to find every building material that you need locally, but there are these amazing long stones in the rivers there, and that's what we built the fireplaces out of. So each of the fireplaces, the stonework, is from the local valley, from the rivers. So
we actually went to the river and pointed at
The ones you want?
Yeah, we want those stones,
amazing.
take them up so
How
much.
did you know that the stones were there? Did somebody on the ground tell you, look, there are these amazing stones in the rivers, we could, you know, potentially find a use for those, and you kind of went, aha, we could use them for the fireplaces.
But it's like when you see that piece that's going to be the mantle, then you figure out how to make the rest of the fireplace around it, and you know how they stack.
And do you also introduce elements of sort of local history, legends, myths, you know, culture, that end of the cultural thing, not just the handcrafts?
Yes, we love
What sort of things have you used?
studying the myths.
Was there anything in Athens? Because that's obviously, you know, full of mythology. Greece, anything you do in Greece?
We kind of felt in Athens that has been done so often.
Done to death.
So
it's the wrong
so
bit of
perhaps
bit of a
that
brand-
was
a bit of a
not the
brand
project
slap.
for us
No.
to do that on. And we're not historians, so we kind of
But
we'll
we like
play
taking
with it.
history or like
Yeah.
reading about history. I think we've done a project in Saudi Arabia where we went about kind of the mystery of traveling, you know, being a traveler through the desert, the kind of Nabataean traveler.
Yes,
you
yeah,
know,
the sort of the idea of the
kind
caravan.
yeah, and the myth and the, you know, the feeling, the mood of it.
Do you think it helps that you're both quite international in your backgrounds?
Yes.
I think traveling, you know, nothing teaches you more than traveling and seeing things. And, you know, the great other thing is the people we meet on each project are so special, and everybody brings something to the end project. You know, it's not just us, it's like every person that we work with.
And then once you've sort of identified your, you know, you found your stones and you've identified your craft works and things, how do you then start? I mean, you touched on this, Nathan, when you said, you know, you find the piece and then you build the interior around it. But how do you go about taking all those elements and spinning those into your story?
It kind of just happens.
So it's a very organic process, would you say?
Very organic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have that sort of spark, that idea at the beginning, but then it is a journey. Design is a journey. So, you know, as you work on a project, you start to find more of those elements, and then you meet this amazing artist, and then there's this really cool craftsman who says, hey guys, you know, what about stonework? And I can take you to this river. And then, you know, the client tells you something about the way they like having a shower and how it needs to be dark and cozy, and you redesign the bathroom, and it's just little pieces along the way. So sometimes the story that you end up with is not the story that you start with.
That's interesting. And do you ever find that you're missing a bit? You ever find that there's a gap in the story that you need to plug somehow? Does that ever happen?
It happens, and then we kind of brainstorm, see how we can fill the gap, you know. A material, a texture, a piece of art.
Yeah, yes, and then you sort of, so then at that point you might identify that you need something, then go back out into the marketplace to say,
And
right, we
find-
need something special for that corner.
It's just perfect.
Yeah.
And is the client on that journey with you throughout the process?
Hopefully.
But I mean, every project is different. You know, it's a different group of people. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 people, sometimes it's 20 people. But that's often the success of the project is the people on the project, like how much freedom does the owner give you? And those are often the most successful projects.
And I guess because you guys are sort of known for that method and that handwriting, you probably do attract clients that give you that freedom to create.
Sometimes not.
Sometimes not. What happens when you don't get the freedom to create?
I mean, I
tell
think
the story.
we've been pretty lucky. And I think if a client gets on board at the beginning, the project just kind of runs, you know?
We're not good with corporate organizations, you know, where there's too much meddling.
You don't do design by committee.
Not
I'm
very
guessing.
well.
Design by
no.
committee is a
No, it's a
disaster.
disaster,
Come
always.
on.
Democrat, I
Always.
don't believe in design democracy.
And do clients appreciate the value of your storytelling?
I think they do. That's why,
It makes the projects more personal for them. So, they get it. It's not just a pretty house or a cool hotel. It's a place that people want to go to. It's a place that people remember. And, it's that connection.
And important to make that emotional connection with the client first before the audience, if you like. So it's like bringing the client along with you because they then understand it's right for the guests in the hotel. Or
But they also then start contributing to the design.
of course they
So
do.
they get excited and they kind of give their inputs and they put a piece of themselves in the project along the way.
How do you communicate the design to the client? What's the process for you guys? As you're pulling all these ideas together, how do you then say, there you go, Mr. Client, this is what you're going to get?
We start off with a big pile of samples, not ordered in any way, not stuck on a board, but just kind of lots of loose samples, finishes, hand sketches. We still believe in hand sketching. And then kind of workshop, almost brainstorm that. So there's a big kind of collage picture board box to start off with.
But you must give the client some direction as to,
Yeah,
or you just literally let them play with it.
No.
Or you all play with it together.
We'll play with it together. But we obviously sketch plans. We kind of, this is the way we would recommend you do it. And that's often how we end up doing it.
Amazing.
Now, Muza Lab work on hospitality projects in exotic aspirational locations. You've done boats, you've done a tourist train in Peru, which I'm intrigued by because
That was special.
Amazing.
yeah. Tell us about that tourist train in Peru. I mean,
So that started off, it was a train that the client had bought in Australia. And it was kind of, the dark mauve kind of color on the outside and all timber paneled on the inside, very
Like
dark.
really
and
heavy,
heavy.
tropical hardwood paneling.
So we went to Peru to see this train that had just arrived there.
So he shipped it from Australia to Peru.
To Peru, exactly.
Wow.
As one does. And then just kind of, the budget wasn't very high. So we had to use what he had, but we wanted to totally transform it. So repainted it much lighter, stripped it out, but kept all the beautiful kind of metal detailings, the kind of old heritage racks, but with a lighter vernacular, and then added in, Peruvian macrame artwork, textures, fabrics, kind of toured the market or the craftspeople that the local people introduced us to.
And if we want to take this train, where should we go?
It goes in.
Some different places.
It's normally Arequipa to Cusco. So
Oh, it's the Cusco train.
Yeah.
it doesn't do Machu Picchu
No.
because the gauge changes on the track.
yeah.
So
You've been.
it does
No,
go
I
to
haven't, but it's
Cusco.
on my bucket
Okay.
list. Most definitely. Number one on my bucket list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it goes like right across Peru, the big lake, so you kind
Yes.
of this vast scenery, and we wanted the focus to be the window out,
Yes.
not the train shouldn't be heavy and overwhelming.
Yeah, of course. Fascinating.
We've all walked into themed pubs and restaurants where the interior didn't feel quite right. Why do you think that is?
Because they're forcing a story rather than letting a story happen naturally.
They're shouting, they're screaming at you, is what they're doing. They're like, this is it, this is it. Whereas I think, some of our stories are quiet.
It should be a
There may
whisper.
be-
It,
exactly.
it shouldn't be in your face.
Yeah. And how do you figure out what's subtle and understated and works in that way rather than, I mean, there must be some clients who say, I want it in your face.
Then they're not the client for
And
us.
They're not for you.
To Muza Lab. They'll be going somewhere
No.
else. But what would you say are the telltale signs of an inauthentic interior? If you walk into a room and it just doesn't feel right, but you can't quite put your finger on it, what do you think makes, specifically what makes you've said it's shouty, but what are those little details that make it inauthentic? What are they doing wrong, these companies?
I think there's just normally too much of something,
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's as simple as just sitting in a chair and realizing something over the course of a meal. That you actually that is stunning, that little piece of art over there, and you want to get up and go look at it when you're done. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it has to be something. And if it's too much, it's just it's a theme park, and that's not. It's a caricature at that point.
So it can't be reproduction. It needs to be authentic. When they're looking at some of the artifacts and things, because you get
No,
these
I don't think that's
plasticized.
fair. Well, plastic anything is bad, but I do think, in the hospitality industry, there is reproduction. You have multiple quantities of things, so you can't have every single thing be 100% unique one-off piece, but it has to have a reason, you know.
So just peppering the walls with horse brasses won't do it.
And how do you manage the way that each piece works together? Because that's also important, isn't it? It can't just be walking into somewhere where there's lots of different stories going on. They've got to work as a cohesive narrative. So how do you figure that out?
I think you need to have your one strong voice in each room. What is your statement piece? And then everything else can be kind of soft. And then that piece really tells the story.
So you're really honing in on a key view, a key element, a key texture, a key artwork. So each area within your project has its own little hook. Would that be fair?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to tell a convincing story on a big budget, but how can you achieve it if you don't have the money for genuine FF&E?
And when we say genuine, we didn't mean it's necessarily the antique, because we've just established that it can't always be the antique, but something that has that genuine sensibility.
Well, again, I think it's a lot more than just FF&E. It's the whole mood of the space. It's the color of the paint on the walls.
But if you
it's the lighting.
have the budget, how?
I think very often in hospitality we've got very low budgets, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's not like people think there's a massive budget, and it's telling the story without that. We often don't have big budgets, but we still manage to do it.
Yeah.
Do you appreciate that as a creative challenge to do it for less?
Yes.
No.
Because we have to, though.
But everybody has a budget. Every project has a budget, and you have to work within that. And it's sort of saying, I love that chair. That's got to be a statement piece. So okay, we have to save money on the sofa and on the
It's a balance,
rug,
isn't
and
it?
you kind of find those things that seduce you, and then you save money on the rest.
In commercial projects, the end user is, you guys do both commercial and resi. In commercial projects, the end user is often psychographically profiled, but is not known as an individual. So you know the type of person, but you don't know whether it's Pete or George or Harry. Is there a different approach to storytelling with private clients? The stories you're telling surely are different to the stories that you tell in commercial projects?
I think it's much more personal if it's private. You can really hone in, or what they want, what they like. We're doing foundation chalets, got a big foundation in Switzerland at the moment. And this client is a wonderful client. We know what he loves, we know what he wants to, his story that he wants to tell. And then we're really just helping him tell his story,
But then it's also sitting down with them, because this person we know quite well, his brother we don't. So it's, sitting down one day over lunch and his brother explaining how his kind of personal space, the most place for him to reset his mind, is in a shower, and how he'd love to be cocooned when he's having a shower. So we went back and completely redesigned his shower. It's all monolithic stone. So it's like he's in this little sort of cocoon space where you can, and it's big enough that you can actually lie down and just be completely drenched with water. And so that's how he takes his time out, he resets his mood. And it's like you need to hear a little bit from somebody about what they're looking for, or the experience they're looking for, so that you can design something for them.
Yeah, why do you think private clients want to use their own home to tell a story?
Because it's kind of where you go to relax and escape, and it's kind of your window for the world of who you are and what floats you, what makes it interesting and what you love.
Do you think there's a difference in the stories that you tell between the private? In my practice, we make a very kind of mental distinction between public areas and private areas within a home. Do you think the stories that you tell in the private spaces are different to the ones that you tell in the public spaces?
I think they can be, yes. It's kind of more intimate.
What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, I think we've been doing a lot more residential the last few years, and it's interesting. You really have to get people to open up to you in a different level. You know, like not many people tell you about the experience of taking a shower, but that one conversation redefined an entire portion of the house just by having that. So I think
Or how they want their wardrobe, you know, we've had that conversation with lots of people because you want to put things away in a certain way, and you know, and then that gives you great satisfaction if it's all beautifully laid out as per what you want.
But I guess too, you were just saying if you'd never had that conversation with the client about the shower, you would not have known that, and he might have not felt confident enough to tell you. So how do you go about drawing those key details out from your clients, getting them to tell you
I think it's
their story
important,
so that you can then interpret it back to them?
I think it's important that not every interaction with a client should be a meeting. Sometimes it should be a coffee, a lunch, a glass of wine with dinner, and just sort of changing the interaction from being sitting across a table chatting with somebody to sort of sitting down and just talking like humans really changes the dynamic of how people start to, you know, open up and share things with you and really talk about themselves a little bit, or what they want to experience in their home.
Yeah, making them feel relaxed and confident enough to be able to have those share those potentially intimate details.
But also just when you walk through a plan with them, you kind of like, what would you do there? How would you feel there? You know, what would you love there? So it's being a good listener as well is really important.
Do you think that high-end residential interiors today are the modern equivalent of the 18th century swagger portrait?
Well, I think that's a great way of, you know, telling the story. Yes, absolutely.
I think people, they want their houses to be personal but interesting. And all of us have been in so many really boring houses, dull houses. And I think sort of the people at the level that we are working at, they want you to see, wow, they have amazing taste in art, or like they have a sense of humor. You know, not everything is so serious. And walking into somebody's house and seeing the most ridiculous chair, you just immediately, it starts to disarm you, and you start to see a bit of them. You know, some people want to show off their wine collection or their record collection, and it's all these little elements where their personality comes through in their house.
But aspirational too.
Aspirational too.
You know, who they want to be as well as who
they
aspire to be, rather than just who they are now.
We're recording the show in Inga's house, and Inga, tell me about this giraffe motif, because I've seen it around your house. What's the story?
I just love giraffes. My partner, we're both very tall, so we call each other giraffe. So we started investing in giraffe photography. So we've got like a Nick Brunt, and you know, through the house we've collected different fantastic giraffe photography.
Would you say then, on that basis, there's a different approach to the private areas in a home as opposed to the public areas?
Yeah, bedrooms, bathrooms versus living spaces or hallways.
I don't know that there's a different approach, but
Or different stories that you're telling, possibly? Maybe a better way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, in a project that we're nearing completion on now, the way the way that the family brushes their teeth is a little bit of an important thing for them, because they currently have children that are at the stage of learning to brush their own teeth. So this made us go back and redesign all of the vanity basins so that they have built-in little toothbrush holders so that the kids make it part of their routine. And I mean, maybe that's a bit weird, I don't know, but
That's interesting.
it is that kind of moment of a period of time when, because of their children and where they're at in their development as humans, we redesigned an entire piece of joinery.
But I think probably the public areas at home are your aspiration, what you want to be, what you want to show the world, and your room is kind of what you are.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We've got a husband and wife where the wife is very meticulous, and her wardrobe, it's as you'd expect, lots of beautiful hanging spaces, lovely drawers to put things in. And when it came to his wardrobe, he goes, I don't want any of that. He said, I just need loose shelves, and either it's on a shelf, and if it's on the floor, it's dirty. That's it. I don't want to hang anything. So,
Just that kind of personal, your own personality can really come through in your own private space.
And is it still important to weave elements of the story of the place or the building into a private client's interior?
yes.
I think it is, yes.
Yeah.
It's kind of having the materials that go with the location, the place.
Yeah.
If you've
Have you
got
got any
a hot
examples
climate.
of where you've done that?
I think in a hot climate, if you're building a villa, you want the views are to be framed. You don't want too many curtains. You want it,
And
not too many carpets, free and open, and so the air can flow through it.
but you probably want stone floors because they'll be a bit cooler, whereas in a cold climate, you might want timber floors because they'll be a bit
Big
warmer in the
rugs.
winter.
Yeah.
Do you ever come across a conflict where the client's personal story is heading in one direction, but the building is heading in an opposite direction?
Oh, yes.
Have you had example? Can you give us an example of and how did you resolve it?
Lots of convincing.
Who wins, the building or the client?
Sometimes it's a compromise, Often it's a compromise in the best possible way. The client wants to be more contemporary, but the building is a bit too traditional. So it's kind of weaving those two things together to kind of find a marriage that works for everybody.
Do you think that the stories you tell impact the behaviour of the users?
I do. I think it's always good to disarm people, make them really relaxed, comfortable. I think that's kind of the first tick of a successful interior space. And then, once you've done that, again, is there something a bit whimsical and humorous? Is there just, I don't know, you want to be
I always say there has to be something that makes you smile. It can't all be so serious. You want to go into space, you want to relax, you want to smile. You also kind of have something that you're going to remember.
Can you bring that sense of humour into hospitality interiors as well as into private residential?
It's a whimsical piece of artwork which is kind of unexpected, or a little detail that's designed to, like, press for champagne, something like that.
That I like.
I want one of those in my house. I'm going to put one of those in my house. It won't be connected to anything, but I can just put a button on the wall. Is emotional design equally relevant, do you think, for both commercial and private clients? You've touched on emotion. A lot of what you've said to me about the stories is actually evoking emotions in clients.
Yeah, I mean, and again, going back to your earlier question about themed things, I think this is where it diverges. A themed thing is not necessarily emotional, whereas for us, short stories are about creating that emotional connection, and it's just that little, like, oh, that guy who painted that piece of art, and picking up a table that you found on the roadside in Senegal with your client because the guy slammed on his brakes and we were there, and it's like, oh, that's kind of a piece of garbage, but it's cool and we had fun today, so let's bring it back with us. So I do think,
It
that's
needs to
what it
evoke an
is.
emotion to be a success.
And that's it. I think that's a really interesting observation, Nathan, that you just made, that when you go into those pastiche interiors, that actually is fundamentally the piece that's missing, is that you don't get that emotional response. There's
Correct.
nothing
You just get kind of overload.
it's just like, ugh. Yeah.
You must both be very open-minded when you come onto a project. I mean, you must feel like you're just taking everything in when you're taking that brief in the first instance. Is that how you describe
I
yourself?
think that's a good way of putting it. Kind of, you have to soak it all in and kind of see what floats to the top and what kind of creates the spark that will work.
And I think for both of us, we get seduced by buildings and sites.
We're building sluts, is what I want to say. If it's a beautiful building,
Yes,
I'll do
I
it
agree.
for,
Absolutely.
We'll be like, they want to pitch, but we're both going on holiday. But then it's like, but that site is so incredible. Like, how can we say no? You do get that excitement about
seduced by the
certain
project.
No,
projects.
you just those projects. There's just some projects that you just want so badly. Yeah, I agree. So, bonus question: of all the amazing projects that Muza Lab have ever worked on, which is your favourite and why? Inge, do you want to start with that one?
I think we've done some lodges in Botswana, which I'd love. You know, the one is up in the Savuti, kind of white sands, so dry, and then the project kind of close to it was in the Okavango Delta, like green and lush. So, I mean, those are just really special.
Why were they so special? Obviously, apart from the setting, but what?
I think because you're so remote, everything has to be planned so well, but you could collect so many great stories there. You know, the one was inspired by the elephants as we were there, and the color of the wet and the dry elephants and the different kind of mud tones.
Yes.
And, you know, it was just, and the other one was like this kind of dry wood color. So I think those will always stay special.
And do you have a favourite, Nathan?
I think it's a very unfair question.
You can have a favorite
your
child.
favourite child, exactly.
You know, I think that
I know which one you love.
the yacht that we just finished has been a really extraordinary
Amazing.
project.
So tell us a bit about that. Where is it? And
So it's currently in the Mediterranean, but it was originally built in the UK in early 1930s. And it's one of those beautiful classic yachts that
is
had
it J class or something?
no, it's a private.
J class.
But it's had 7 owners in its history, including being requisitioned for the war effort. So it's one of these beautiful old vessels that has been modified over time. And the last significant modification was not terribly elegant. So it was a lot about stripping back and removing things off the vessel. But then, you know, once it got into the shipyard and we had sort of demoed it, we started finding like beautiful, huge, thick, old growth pine wood that we were able to repurpose and reuse. And, you know, there were bullet holes in it from the war. And you find all of these interesting pieces. And maybe in this project, storytelling was a little bit more obvious because each of the guest cabins has some kind of reference to one of the previous owners or previous name of the vessel. And sometimes it's really subtle. Like one of the cabins is called Gaviota. The ship at one point had been named Gaviota, and it's just the ruffled fabric we used on the wall as a reference to seagull feathers. So sometimes it's subtle elements like that.
Yeah.
But also the way that the client gave us the brief was, I want you to capture the spirit of when it would have been launched, rather than something that had sort of been bastardized over the decades and changed. So it was a really simple brief, and it was quite fun to do that.
Wonderful.
And clients love, you know, once the house is finished, telling these stories.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's so nice. You know, once we've told our stories, they can tell theirs.
Do you give them a narrative, a book almost on the project so that they can tell stories once it's been completed?
Sometimes we make books for projects, but other times, you know, they just know the stories so well from being part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, you've taken them to see the thing being made or whatever it is, and they love that, and they love telling it to their friends. And
Great dinner party.
yes,
Kind of,
yeah. Thank you so much, Inga and Nathan, for your time today. That was the most fantastic and inspirational conversation.
Yes, excellent discussion. Thanks so much for your time, and thank you for hosting us in your beautiful home as well. It's been lovely to chat with you. We do hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please do get in touch on our social profiles. We're at Interior Design Business Pod. This episode has been a Wildwood Plus production.